Nintendo is listening, but what are they hearing? This is the question that's on the forefront of people's minds following the release of the Questionnaire concerning Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door. The existence of the Questionnaire has been known for a while, but recently a kind soul has shared the link, allowing people to look at the actual questions. So, in this video we're going to look through and try to analyse what is the thought process here, going question by question. To what degree is this the direction of questioning from the developers themselves, and to what extent is this purely a marketing-driven exercise? And how will these results be interpreted by Nintendo, and what might be the consequences for the future Paper Mario titles, and indeed for other aging franchises? To start off, let's give a bit of context. Paper Mario has been extensively covered by other channels, so I would refer to, in particular, Arlo for deeper summaries, but the first two Paper Marios in particular used very traditional RPG mechanics and were, in many respects, full-on role-playing titles, creative characters, imaginative locations, a fusion of the Mario universe with something new and imaginative and different. However, over time the games have become progressively safer, with characters being adaptations of existing Mario mascots and losing their individualism and charm, while the gameplay styles have moved away from traditional RPG mechanics and have become more individualized, with a focus in theory on being accessible. This has also helped to mark them out from the Mario and Luigi series of RPGs, which seems to have died a terrible death in 2019 after the remake of Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story was sent out to die in the last days of the 3DS. Allegedly, and according to the words of series producer Kensuke Tanabe, the reason for this change was that stories and different characters didn't test well in a questionnaire, so they were responding to what they perceived to be fan feedback. Around the same time, Yoshiaki Koizumi's elaborate and creative story for Super Mario Galaxy was criticised by Shigeru Miyamoto, who felt that the narrative was less important, and so Super Mario Galaxy 2 pulled this right back. The Origami King in 2020 did have some quite dramatic moments, and it wasn't narrative free, but when they used the paper aesthetic not as a way of telling the story, but as a plot point in its own right, with the villains all being various paper and stationary themed baddies, it did make the game feel a little bit flim-flam, while the battle mechanics, I found, lost their charm very quickly. As a result of these changes, nobody less than superstar Nintendo YouTuber Arlo initiated the Remaster Thousand-Year Door hashtag and campaign in the wake of the Origami King's release to try to bring Nintendo back to its roots, with a remaster of the series' creative high point that best exemplified what the series can be. Now, remastering the Thousand-Year Door ricocheted around YouTube, Twitter, and all the usual places, and it can't possibly have escaped Nintendo's hearing. And now, ta-da, the Thousand-Year Door remake has appeared. Now, there are a few reasons to think that the Thousand-Year Door remake might have been in development independent of any fan campaign prior to their campaign even launching. Nintendo likes to have just one original game per console per franchise, unless there is overwhelming public support or it is financially in the interests of the development partner. More on how that works in this video at the top. In this case, Intelligent Systems would be keen to put out regular Paper Mario titles, but the Paper Mario team also works on WarioWare, and I've got another video at the top breaking down the relationship between the two teams. Having a remake of the Thousand-Year Door has kept the Paper Mario team to their regular 4-yearly cycles of games, but they have also managed to double their output of WarioWare titles, with Get It Together and Move It releasing over recent years. In this sense, thinking from a 2020 perspective, putting forward a remake of one of their classics would make perfect sense, and since the original Paper Mario was already bound for N64 on their NSO very shortly, the Thousand-Year Door remained the obvious candidate. However, it's also possible that they were influenced by the fan campaign, since the development of WarioWare Get It Together would have absorbed the team's time to a significant degree, meaning that the commissioning of the title would likely not have occurred until after the Origami King was released, at which time the fan campaign was getting going. But there have been more changes in the world of Mario in any event since 2020. Up until that point, Nintendo were keen to keep Mario as a slightly anodyne company mascot, and so art and games were increasingly safe in their presentations, except perhaps for the core team in Tokyo working on Super Mario Odyssey, where seemingly anything went. But the arrival of the film was by definition a narrative experience, while Super Mario Bros. Wonder clearly demonstrated the necessity of a more imaginative take on the overall overachiever. Also, the tragic demise of Mario & Luigi devs Alpha Dream following the flop of their last title on 3DS left a hole in the market for Mario RPGs, a hole only partially filled by the Super Mario RPG remake last year. There are lots of possibilities here, but few certainties. We also know that Nintendo does commission polls and questionnaires about its games reasonably frequently. They recently did this for Tears of the Kingdom. Yes, partly this is to feedback to game developers. We know from the way they talked about dungeons that the developers recognised that traditional dungeons were missed from Breath of the Wild, and even though many might feel that the Tears of the Kingdom temples didn't quite take the step back towards the grand puzzle boxes they were hoping for, it's nevertheless clear that the developers were trying to address feedback. They are evidently listening, but they also have a more practical goal, which is to sell the games, and in this sense the polling is going to come from the marketing department. It's not yet known if other territories are being asked similar questions, which would suggest that this is a company-wide initiative, or whether these are driven by a particular marketing drive within Nintendo of America. We also know that many of the NOA marketing team are, as you'd expect, big Nintendo fans. Ex-employees Kit Ellis and Krista Yang are icons of the Nintendo YouTube universe after all, and they are massive fans. It is completely conceivable that this marketing was commissioned to prove a point, or at least to test a theory, that the original research suggesting people did not like more independently spirited Paper Mario fare was flawed, if not downright misleading. It's possible to imagine how this could occur, but there is also a simpler explanation. I have a mild hunch, since both the Tears of the Kingdom poll and this one took place immediately after the financial year, that this is either a late commission from the previous financial year's budget to use up some budget that hadn't been allocated, or it's utilising a new financial year's money at the beginning of the year. I'm not clear that this research is routinely done, and if it were, it's not clear that Paper Mario would usually be such a priority. But of course, if this financial year is going to be fairly bare bones in terms of games, and if they have a marketing budget to use, it's quite possible that Paper Mario has simply been in the right place at the right time to get the level of focus that it's now receiving. After all, what other games could they reasonably poll in this point in time, given that the Thousand Year Door is really the only significant title on the immediate horizon? Okay, we've set the stage and looked at some of the why. Now let's get into the fine details of the poll itself and see what we can see. So we start off with a question talking about game genres. Given that Paper Mario is a traditional RPG, it's of tangible interest to them as to whether it's appealing to people who are already RPG fans. After all, if their player base is significantly made up of RPG players, then more elaborate RPG mechanics would be fair game. On the other hand, there are a wide range of genres given here, and since Paper Mario has already been experimental, it offers the developers an insight into potential areas of crossover. The Origami King, for example, had very much a puzzle game vibe in its combat system, while Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle managed to inject a strong tactics element into it. Clearly, there is a secondary consideration here though, which is to think how the game can be marketed. It's unlikely that active or exercise game fans are going to also be big consumers of Paper Mario necessarily, but if there were a combination that emerged as a surprise from this particular question, maybe that could be something worth looking into. I suspect the presence of this option was in there merely for completeness in terms of genres, but given the outstanding success of Ring Fit Adventure in combining exercise games and RPGs, it would not completely surprise me if they did have an idea to try an exercise title using a Mario branding. If this were the case, Paper Mario could be a good fit, although probably given the over-the-shoulder mechanics of Ring Fit Adventure, the paper aesthetic might not work quite so well. Still, I would give a 10% prediction chance to the idea of a Mario exercise title before the end of 2028. It's unlikely, but since Mario has been in almost every other genre under the sun, why shouldn't he go down the chute of exercise titles as well? I think if people didn't identify RPGs as their favourite genre, it's not necessarily a problem though. After all, it's good if Paper Mario has appeal that cuts through and across traditional boundaries and could even be a gateway for people to experience different types of RPGs. So if Paper Mario can serve as an introductory game, a way to get action game players into the likes of Golden Sun or even more intense RPG experiences like Xenoblade Chronicles, that will position Paper Mario as being a very useful part of Nintendo's game ecosystem, although I think it's something unlikely that they're going to be considering right at present. The next question then probes more deeply about RPGs and how many people are actually buying. Again, the question is essentially about how much interest people have in purchasing most of these titles. There's not much point in going down the route of core RPG mechanics in Mario if it's just going to steal players from existing RPGs that Nintendo may want to promote. Is the market actually large enough to support a range of entries? And then we get an interesting question where they ask for which series people have also played. A lot of these are the usual candidates you would expect. Other RPGs in the Nintendo wheelhouse like Pokemon, Fire Emblem and Xenoblade Chronicles. There's also Zelda, which in the old days at least, I always saw referred to as an action RPG, but these days is generally perceived as just an action game and a completely separate genre from RPGs. But there are also Metroidvanias such as Metroid and Castlevania, which are of course role-playing only in the sense that almost every game is. But what marks those games out particularly is the level of atmosphere and even ongoing plot elements from game to game, something that, as far as I can recall, has never been tried with Mario to any significant degree, except perhaps the merest of back references in Super Mario Galaxy 2 and I suppose Super Mario Land 3 when Wario picks up after his humiliating defeat in Super Mario Land 2. Is this a hint that we're about to enter a long Paper Mario saga with referbacks? Probably not, but I think the capacity for a little bit more continuity in the universe might be something they could look to develop if they want to build up a core of people who are dedicated to these games. Now, I suspect the mention of games like Triangle Strategy might also be a way of subtly promoting some of their older games, but it does give the idea of the depth of play experience people are willing to deal with. Personally, as much as I love tactics games, and as much as I'm an avid reader, the sheer level of text in Triangle Strategy made me feel like I was reading a book more than playing a game. There was literally an hour of solid text at one point, and since the game world didn't grab me particularly, I never enjoyed it as much as I expected, despite absolutely loving the battle mechanics. Similarly, Xenoblade Chronicles is an amazing title, and I'm currently replaying Definitive Edition, which I never finished previously, just because it was such a long haul. Incredibly in-depth and mechanically complicated games like this are unlikely to show much in the orbit of broader Paper Mario's fanbase, but I'd be fascinated to see what that level of overlap is. How many people who love Paper Mario go on to play these more mechanically complex games? Then we have a question which essentially says, have you heard of the title before? This is a common way of testing the efficacy of the marketing strategy so far and to see what marketing work needs to be done, but it may also be a way that they can see what the reputation of the games are like. The next question as well also feels like this is mainly aimed at being a proof of concept for the success or otherwise of their advertising approaches, and potentially is looking at new ways that they can push this. It says, where did you see information about Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door? Select all that apply. Now here's the thing, I'm really interested to see what their responses could have been for videos and reviews from influencers, and I know we'll never know, but although this is probably a standard feature of these kinds of questionnaires, it could have been incorporated under social media discussions if they didn't want to specify videos and influencers separately. But the fact that they've given it its own separate box, does that indicate that they're making an oblique reference to the remaster of the Thousand Year Door hashtag? I'm not sure. The next question though seems to essentially set out the key talking points they want to discuss. Please select everything that you already know about Paper Mario. But they're giving very specific lists. I like the fact they bracket the release date so it reminds people as well as questions them. It's curious that they talk specifically about the game's plot, there's a question about the characters and settings, and there is one about the mechanics. There is nothing about it being accessible, there's nothing about the paper mechanics being fun in particular, there's nothing about it featuring familiar characters. It's possible to imagine that you could dredge up a different set of questions which identify what you might consider to be the key selling points of a Paper Mario title, but the questions here do seem to show an understanding of the strengths of the Thousand-Year Door in particular. The next question then tracks Paper Mario games people have played before. I think it's interesting that it focuses exclusively on Paper Mario. After all, you could imagine Mario & Luigi, Super Mario RPG, and the Mario & Rabbids series all falling into the broad category of Mario RPGs, and therefore all being listed here, but they're focusing exclusively on Paper Mario. Now, there might be a sense in this, as the feedback may all go back to Kensuke Tanabe's team, and they're focusing on just the Paper Mario side of the fence. However, one common theory is that this is fishing for interest in a Mario & Luigi revival, and while I think there's a non-zero chance, 10% at least, that we see another Mario & Luigi title before the end of 2026, I don't see it as being immediately on the horizon, and this questionnaire doesn't seem to presage any particularly imminent Mario & Luigi revival. If anything, it makes me wonder whether this questionnaire is looking to test firstly for games that they could potentially remake, and secondly, what is the appetite for people double dipping if they own an existing game like the Thousand-Year Door on GameCube. For the latter, they have obviously had very good experiences of this with Zelda or Luigi's Mansion, where people may buy new and updated versions of the same games, but Paper Mario, beloved as it is not exactly up there with Zelda, and never has been sales-wise. Still, it very much changes the cost-benefit calculation of developing Paper Mario games if there is a sense that, like Zelda titles, they can make these into evergreen releases that they can iterate upon semi-regularly by remaking them and bringing them to a new generation, Disney style. If they could release Super Paper Mario in 8 years' time at the end of the next console's lifespan, so much the better. On the other hand, given the strengths they're identifying, it strikes me that Sticker Star, Color Splash, and even the Origami King are unlikely to have the same kind of name recognition and success that allows a second life. This, more than anything else, I think is what's likely to change the needle in terms of how they approach Paper Mario games going forward, but let's not leap too far ahead just yet. The next question, how interested are you in purchasing it? This is interesting, I guess, because it gives an idea of the makeup, particularly of their initial audience. A poll like this has all kinds of drawbacks, not least the fact that it's been shared online and so has doubtless already been filled in by the most fanatical of the fan base, which could be seen as unrepresentative. In fact, it almost certainly is. But looking at the dates it was filled in, and by using control questions like this one, it should still be possible to get some sense out of who exactly they're targeting from these questions. So this next question, for what reasons are you interested in purchasing Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door, is particularly interesting. The options here are fascinating. I like single-player role-playing games is on there. I've played or I'm a fan of Paper Mario franchise games is also on there. I enjoyed playing Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door game on GameCube. I look forward to the battle mechanics. The story plot seems interesting. I've played or I'm a fan of the Paper Mario series. I've heard many good things about the original Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door game. I look forward to the Mario adventure. Or character designs are cute and appealing. And this is the few, in fact I think it's the only one, where you can actually write in your own comment, which is something that, again, it will be very interesting to know what feedback exactly they got. I think it's particularly interesting that the character designs are said to be cute and appealing, which, while the paper aesthetic is very pleasant, isn't necessarily the same as the characters being interesting in and of themselves. Having said that, a lot of the Mario franchise is based on bright, colourful characters. It's not exactly Metroid, where, as much as I love Kraid, Ridley and Mother Brain, they've never yet, to my knowledge, been described as cute, although I dare say there's someone in the comments, even now, proving me wrong. After you've chosen, it asks you to deep dive which of those that you've chosen you rate most highly of all. Now, it feels to me that this is mostly geared with a marketing sensibility to know how to focus their ad campaign, but of course that data will go back to the Paper Mario team as well. The next question after this is a confirmatory question on purchasing. This is an interesting way of checking against the previous question on purchasing. Is there a disconnect between their level of interest and their likelihood to purchase? I also think in a way this is being used as a marketing tool. One way of concretizing people's choices is asking them to actually commit to a choice in writing. It's why writing targets is effective. So oddly, I do wonder whether this technique is as much being used as a sales tool as it is a research tool, since it means people are more likely to buy the game if they respond very positively. Also, of course, it has value because it shows the marketing team which specific people they are targeting. If people have already pre-ordered the title and are mad keen on the story elements, is that an effective thing for the marketing campaign to focus on? Potentially, if you think that story elements are the key selling point of the game, you might think absolutely you should continue to sell it because that's why people are buying it. But equally, you might think that if lots of people who are really dedicated to the game's story have already purchased it, then that element has already been adequately communicated, and now the people who haven't signed on need to have something else to focus on, something else to persuade them to get into the game. It will be very interesting to see when Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door adverts start coming out, as they will do I'm sure very soon, whether they have particular focuses on any of the things on the previous list. I'd love to see exactly how closely those ideas mirror what's being probed in this questionnaire. Then we get a range of characters who appear in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, and the question is quite open. Which of these do you like a lot? A lot is an interesting modifier. I guess the problem here is that some people might tick all of them, but there is a mix here of characters who are very traditional in Mario style and characters who are a lot more eccentric and unique. It's likely to me that this will mainly inform marketing strategies in terms of who they put forward. I struggle to think we're going to get Goombella in Smash off the back of this poll, or even they will be able to meaningfully determine which features people like. However, the key thing about this is the absence of, for example, Paper Mario himself. That would certainly have skewed the results, as a lot of people, particularly casual fans, would simply say yes, they like Mario because Mario's the lead character. By selecting just the original characters, they can really see how people feel about the range of character types, a far greater range than many recent Paper Mario titles. Then we get a question which says select below where you think you fall on the topic of following the games industry. How influential are you, or how influenced are you? I guess the potential here is that if you can successfully target people with a high degree of influence, it acts as a kind of force multiplier for your campaign, as they might tell more people about it. On the other hand, it also suggests that if people are already invested in the Nintendo news ecosystem, there's very little point continuing to plug away at those same people. It also, to some degree, identifies their existing cut-through and the success of previous initiatives such as, of course, Nintendo Directs. I doubt Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door has a huge amount of cut-through for non-Nintendo fans in the way that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom probably did, based on the outside success of the first game, but of course it is still a major Mario title in the wake of a Mario movie, so who knows, perhaps it will catch the attention of more people. Another question, which again feels fairly standard, probes how responsive people are to advertising campaigns and who responds to good word of mouth. Again, this feels more like something of interest to the marketers than necessarily to the core development staff, although I guess there is an incentive for people who want to learn more about the games to ensure that they have good words of mouth, rather than having games which burn bright but fizzle out fast. This has never been a major problem for Nintendo, who do go by quality as the watchword most of the time, although of course there's always the odd Mario Strikers case where, sadly, the follow-up is disappointing. Then there's a third topic asking very specifically about your level of influence for other people, and again, I think it's a way of seeing whether or not they can use one campaign to have a larger effect if they target people who might have influence on others. Then there's another question about being a parent to a child below 13, which is a fairly common question in these polls, but also presumably is from an awareness that many GameCube owners may well buy this for their children to play with them, having had such a positive experience of the original. While this might be a good source of sales, it's intrinsically quite limiting, and so disaggregating the nostalgia motive might be helpful. On the other hand, you can imagine that the game is being promoted to younger customers who might become the keen Nintendo fans of tomorrow, and this could be a very good thing. Nintendo has targeted nostalgia before. The Link's Awakening adverts in the UK specifically featured people digging out an old Game Boy from the attic and discovering Link's Awakening, and I could see them thinking that if they can raise awareness among GameCube nostalgics for the new game, then they could use this as a way to bring the kind of cross-generational gameplay experience they like to promote into people's living rooms. At the very least, as a statistic, it allows them to talk about their cross-generational appeal, which is something they're keen to promote and nurture, with families being at the heart especially of a lot of the Nintendo of America advertisements in recent times. Of course, this still has a positive bearing on their likelihood to focus on more in-depth gameplay experiences. I just can't imagine people having a deep, nostalgic connection in the same way to Colour Splash compared to the original two games, and while that might be a lack of imagination on my part, I think building a strong narrative experience and more immersive gameplay mechanics has to be something that leads to a longer tail interest in those games. This is the chance, therefore, for Nintendo to try to hook that level of interest in for the much longer term and to build cross-generational Nintendo gamers. Then we have a question which essentially relates to their competition. Are you currently playing games on any of the following devices? I think it's interesting that they go back quite far on other consoles, back to PlayStation 3, but they don't go back to the Wii U or even the Wii and DS, although I know some families who still do play Wii. I suppose the key here is that they want to migrate people over to their current consoles, so it's not really a benefit for them to know if people are playing on older hardware, since they're just going to keep plugging away at the newer stuff anyway. But an interest in PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 might suggest an interest in older games. However, it could be interpreted either way. People who already play old games might be less interested in remakes. Or perhaps there's a lot of games on these older systems which are valued, but which aren't being given a proper airing at present. It's the kind of statistic that I think you could read a lot of different things into, and perhaps it will be used to justify different marketing decisions and different game release choices down the track. It will be interesting to know when this is analysed what perspectives they bring and what ideas they take, but I don't suppose we'll ever get to that. At least not unless there's another Kensuke Tanabe interview where he explains his thinking. Finally, we have the playtime question. Of course, this is something that they can also use to anchor against their existing usage data to test the credibility of the questionnaires results. By comparing usage time against customer accounts data, it should be possible to build up a reasonable picture of what segment of the audience they have successfully targeted. It also suggests the level of passion and the potential for creating multiple games in a series for Paper Mario. After all, if people play less than an hour a week, a big RPG like Paper Mario could last all year, meaning that it's actually a disadvantage to them to sell it, as it's likely to crowd out other purchases. However, I think that is pretty unlikely. And then, after we're done, we have, of course, the thank you for the survey. So, what can we conclude? Firstly, I think the odds of Paper Mario returning to a more traditional form for its next game are higher than they've been in a long time, but far from certain all the same. I can't even really necessarily put a forecast on it in the same way, because it's very difficult to define exactly what that would look like, because there are different ways that they could return to Paper Mario's roots without being necessarily the same as the games that have gone before. Would something like the Origami King, which did have companions, quite count as having regular companions? Would a level of story complexity be something that you could put an objective measure on? Let me know in the comments if you've got any ideas about how I could put together a forecast for this. However, the sales of the Thousand Year Door compared to the Origami King will be one way of determining the level of interest in this kind of title from Nintendo. Also, the way people respond to the characters and the way they go out of their way to promote the characters could be very telling. If they're promoting the characters as interesting as opposed to cute, that's a big difference in the way they expect their messaging to land. Is it possible that just as a long ago poll moved the needle against more complex and narratively and mechanically interesting Paper Marios, this could drag us back to something closer resembling the kind of games that many would look forward to? I think we shouldn't overestimate one data point. There are lots of other reasons right now for them to be pushing Mario, and pushing Mario particularly into the RPG space, deepening people's relationship with the character in the wake of the Mario movie. A second conclusion I would draw is that we're at an inflection point for the games in terms of the balance of old Paper Mario and new Paper Mario content. It is inevitably a good thing for the company if they can, on occasion, reutilize old materials and plough their resources into newer titles to sell alongside them. It seems they did this successfully with WarioWare, and they may want to do this again in the future. However, I don't think that this is a consideration that will come into play for quite a long time. Paper Mario's strict and reliable 4-year schedule means that 2028 would be the next likely release, and I would expect it to be a full, original new title on a new system. Paper Mario has never really looked to explore the potential the system it's on. Yes, they're always very attractive games graphically, but they're still basically AA games rather than AAA. Still, if the corollary of doing remakes as opposed to a full new game, is not just their ability to put out another WarioWare in the meantime, but also the chance to spend a lot more time thinking about and perfecting and crafting a future Paper Mario title that could be very much to the good. Therefore, I'm going to call a 70% forecast now that there will be a new Paper Mario by the end of 2028, and 90% that there will be some kind of Paper Mario release by 2029, allowing for the potential that this could be held back for a longer and more involved development cycle, or that Nintendo might want to hold back releases due to their own reasons or unforeseen circumstances. Before I go, I would be remiss if I didn't point out to you my Intelligent Systems deep dive from earlier this week, and of course there are loads more Nintendo forecasts floating on the screen right now for you to check out if you're interested. Thank you as ever for watching, and I will see you again soon.